And today he is speaking to us about, does teleology prove the existence of God, or does God prove the existence of teleology? So I'll hand it over to Father Mariusz Tabaczek.
Thank you very much, Father Thomas. So yes, I think the time is right for us today to switch and move towards theology. And I will now share my screen with you so that you can see my presentation. And the idea that I have for this lecture is simply to reflect on first, one moment, to reflect on teleology in the classical approach to natural theology. So in what way teleology can inspire natural theology, then in what way teleology can inspire theology of nature, an alternative approach. And then at the end, I will look into how or what is the place for teleology in science-oriented panentheism, as it is one of the very important frameworks or contexts, points of reference in science theology dialogue of today. So let's begin first with teleology in a classical approach to natural theology. First, let's define natural theology. I believe that natural theology departs from the observation of natural phenomena and arrives, and while reflecting on those natural or upon those natural phenomena in reference to philosophy of nature and metaphysics, it arrives at the theological conclusion that only the existence of God actually offers a satisfying and conclusive answer to the human search for understanding and meaning of things. And here we think about meaning of life. So once again, it departs from nature. So we don't presuppose that there is God. And the claim is that natural theology actually discovers God through reflection upon nature. What are the advantages? What is the main advantage of this approach? Well, Ian Barbour rightly says, I believe, that it starts from scientific data on which we might expect agreement. On which we might expect agreement despite cultural and religious differences. So it can be a common approach that may bring many people actually to take. At the same time, the difficulty might be here that when taken alone, it might reduce God to God of philosophers, the unmoved mover, maybe even a deistic creator, remote and not engaged in his relation to created reality. Also, one might ask whether at least some of the arguments developed in natural theology, whether maybe they in fact presuppose God's existence, and they simply become a set of rhetorical exercises for those who actually do believe in God, and they just make those arguments in favor, in order, as I said, just an exercise for themselves, for those who already believe in God. So there is a lurking danger here, from which I believe St. Thomas Aquinas and the classical approach in theology are free. And if we believe that they are free, so let's see how teleology, that is a subject of this conference, may inspire this approach to theology, that is to nature, that is natural theology. So as you probably know, teleology becomes one of the crucial points of departure for Aquinas' natural theology in his fifth way. The text of this in which he formulates this fifth way is now projected on the screen. So Thomas says that we can observe that things act for an end. This is what we discussed throughout this conference. And they do it, he says, always or nearly always in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. Then he claims they do it not fortuitously, but designedly, and they achieve their end. And then he concludes that there must be an intelligent being that exists and by whom all natural things are directed to the end, and this being we all call God. So this is the formulation of the argument, right? Now, the question that is in the title of my presentation I'm sorry, before I go to that question, when we reflect upon the fifth way, the first question we should ask whether the fifth way, which I call the way or an argument for the existence of God from teleology, whether it is the same as the argument from design, and whereas we should call the Aquinas' fifth way an argument from design. And actually, many do call his fifth way an argument from design. To give you an example, Timothy Paul claims that the fifth way speaks of the designer who directs the actions of the non-cognizant beings to act for an end. Kenneth Einar Himma, he claims that perhaps the earliest philosophically rigorous version of the design argument again owes to St. Thomas Aquinas, and he means his fifth way. Once again, Del Rasch and Jeffrey Kopersky, they claim that theistic arguments departing from exquisiteness of structure, function, or interconnectedness, once again, are classified as teleological arguments or frequently as arguments from or to design. So you can see how philosophers of religion and theologians are actually putting or blending those two terms, argument from teleology and from design. I think that part of this, I call it confusion, might be an outcome of the fact that the English translation of the fifth way has this term designedly. Those things are guided designedly to achieve their end. In Latin, we have ex intentione, so we don't have a term which would speak about design. Now, let's move forward and ask the question, does Aquinas actually have an argument from design in his entire corpus of his works? Well, I believe that the closest he gets to framing such an argument for the existence of God, which we might call an argument from design, is the end of the 13th chapter of the first part of his Summa Contra Gentiles. This is a long chapter where he has a number of proofs for the existence of God or arguments in favor of the existence of God. And at the very end, he has a short paragraph that you have now on screen, where he forms something that possibly may be considered an argument from design. He says that contrary and discordant things cannot be parts of one order except under someone's government, which enables all and each to tend to a definite end. Things of diverse natures come together under one order, and therefore there must be a being by whose providence the world is governed. This we call God. On what basis this argument might be considered an argument from design? Well, because in this argument there is a reference to teleology. Things come together. There is a telos here. There is also a reference to providence and government of the universe, but in the center of this argument truly is the order and parts coming together to form an order. And I think with respect to this, you might think it is an argument from design. Now, at the same time, I would like to emphasize that order and design are not equivalent terms, because only the latter presupposes the existence and causal activity of conscious designer right away. When we say a design, there must be a designer. Now, therefore, I claim that there are at least two conditions that need to be met in order for this argument to become truly an argument from design. First, I believe Aquinas would have to introduce one more proposition saying that order observed in nature is an outcome or a sign of design. And then he would have to replace, in my opinion, the conclusion referring to the categories of providence and government with the one saying something like this: there must therefore be some being by whose designing activity different parts in the created reality come together to form an order. I claim that only by meeting those two requirements, this would become an argument from design, because otherwise, I think it is closer to the argument from providence and governance, which is more developed by Aquinas in his De Veritate, question 5, article 2. It is also important to acknowledge, which many philosophers who study Aquinas acknowledge, before I say this, I want to emphasize that even if we treat it as an argument from design, even if we want to treat that argument as an argument from design, it differs substantially from contemporary intelligent design argumentation and intelligent design movement, at least in 3 ways. For Aquinas, designer cannot intervene directly. He works through secondary and instrumental causes, unless he works through miracles, but normally he works through secondary and instrumental causes. Whereas for intelligent design followers, designer intervenes directly to instantiate irreducibly complex structures and phenomena. For Aquinas, he defies causal agency of God analogically, neither univocally nor equivocally in relation to contingent causes. Whereas intelligent design followers, they defy causal agency of intelligent designer univocally, in my opinion, as an activity of a transcendent intelligent cause among contingent causes. Finally, Aquinas, for him, his argument has undoubtedly a philosophical and theological nature in reference to the contemporary division of scientific disciplines, whereas intelligent design movement states that its main argument falls within the scope of natural science and can be actually, in fact, verified empirically. So we see how different an argument from design in Aquinas, if there is such an argument, would be from the intelligent design movement that we know within the contemporary setting. Also, we have to emphasize what philosophers studying Aquinas acknowledge, that the argument, if it is an argument from design in Summa Contra Gentiles, it is much less developed from the philosophical standpoint. And for this reason, it should not be regarded as equal to Aquinas' major ways of demonstrating God's existence in natural theology. And in my opinion, it should be therefore also distinguished clearly from the argument from teleology. They might be related, but they should not be conflated. Okay, now the question that is in the title of the lecture, part of the first part of the title asks this question: does teleology prove the existence of God? Because this is what, in a way, natural theology should be about. We start from nature and we want to reach God. Does it work? Well, this is a complex issue, because we have to distinguish here, and Aquinas does that, between 2 types of demonstration. Demonstration propter quid, which moves from causes to their effects. This is the best way to argue demonstratively, says Aquinas. But there is the second type of demonstration quia, which moves from effects back to their causes. And in our 5 ways, and in the 5th way as well, what we are dealing with is this second type of demonstration, which Aquinas acknowledges is a weaker demonstration. And particular issue with this demonstration is that the middle term of this demonstration is God's quiddity, the nature of God. So in order for this argument to work, we need to know what is God's quiddity. And the question obviously is, do we know the nature of God exactly? I don't think we do. So Aquinas knows that, and he suggests that this definition that we need here might not necessarily, it may be that the definition that we require is not the definition explaining the real nature of God, but just a definition explaining the meaning of the term God. Would it be to for God to like what attributes a being such as God should have in order to be God, right? So he says that this nominal definition might suffice. Well, there's a long conversation whether this works or not, and whether we still speak here about a demonstration or maybe just something lower than this. Okay, and I don't have time to engage this conversation. There are also 4 common objective 5th way. This would be maybe reference to material, formal, and efficient causes is sufficient. Well, to this Aquinas would say, not really, because if you introduce efficient causes, they act for a purpose, and we watch and we note that, and we see that. So you cannot get rid of teleology, he would argue. What about behavior described as teleological being or occurring by chance? Well, here Aristotle and Aquinas after him would say that chance is ontologically real, but it always refers to and happens in the reality which is ordered in some ways. So you cannot get rid of teleology. Perhaps teleology is real, but is purely natural, and there is no need to refer it to God. Well, Aquinas would say you would then end up with infinite regress, and an ending chain of teleological causes. So therefore, you actually need God. And then we have the question, obviously coming, a question about evil, goal-directed evil actions, to which Aquinas would say this is the privation of good and not something that is willed by God. So I'm running through those arguments because this is the main purpose of my lecture. They have been discussed throughout the entire history of Thomism, and you will find those who would claim that, yes, this is a demonstration of God's existence, and you will find those who would claim, no, it is not, it doesn't work this way, and it's just a reasonable argument in favor of existence of God, but not a pure demonstration. You would find those theologians discussing those arguments against the fifth way. Yes, there's this conversation. You will find voices going into both directions, and it is up to you to make a choice. What interests me in this lecture is something different. Is the question about what we learn from Aquinas' fifth way in this theology of in natural theology. Well, we will. What we hear is that what we learn from other theologians is this: what we get from this fifth way is a proof, or maybe just a meaningful argument, and I tend to think the second option is true, for the existence of God, understood as the source of all teleological phenomena in nature. And then further conclusion would be, as a part of natural theology, this argument does not say anything more about God. The goal of this argument, as all other five ways, is just to depart from nature and discover that there is God as a first cause. That's it, no more. Therefore, Timothy Paul would say, Aquinas himself sees the concept of God discovered through his five ways as rudimentary, since it is only in the following articles that we will find him asking or questioning whether God has a body, is perfect, is good, infinite, immutable, eternal, and even whether there's just one God. So the claim is this we can discover only through reference to revelation. In natural theology, we just discovered that God is, in the fifth way, a first cause of all teleological phenomena. I want to question this approach in my lecture. I believe that we can learn much more from Aquinas' fifth way when we refer to the very rich understanding of teleology in Aristotle, which Aquinas does. First, I have 4 points. First, Aristotle's notion of teleology introduces, this is very important, a dynamical aspect to his definition of essence of a given thing or organism. Therefore, Aristotle, among many, at least 4 terms that he uses to express what a substantial form or what essence of a being is, like form, shape, paradigm, archetype, or pattern, or the most sophisticated one, the definition of the essence, he adds one more term that is entelecheia, entelechy, that is form as actualized in the final state of the development of a being. We heard this quotation in Professor Skutrufinis' presentation, the what, essence, and that for the sake of which are one. Therefore, my claim is this: if teleology, therefore, drives things and organisms to achieve the highest level of actuality available for them, that is, to live their life to the full, then God, who is the source of goal-directedness, is not only the highest metaphysical principle, but is also a being that is actualized to the highest possible degree, and is a being that is most alive, that is life itself. And I think this is a great discovery. The second point, teleology relates all the beings to intelligence. I hate this thing because I cannot see everything. Maybe I will, how can I move this bar away from, okay, anyways. Teleology relates beings to knowledge and intelligence. And this applies to both inanimate, animate, and intelligent beings because their subconscious and conscious goal-directedness relates them to still higher intelligence. And if this is the case, then my suggestion is that Aquinas, at least indirectly, asserts here that God, as the transcendental source of teleology, must have knowledge and intelligence and have them in the highest possible degree. He must be omniscient, therefore, and infinitely surpass all other intelligent beings. This is the second lesson. The third lesson would be this. Teleology has a normative import. Goal-directedness in things and organisms is oriented toward what is good for them, and we read about this. Aquinas says the organisms strive to what is best for them, right? Therefore, God, as the source of teleology, must be utterly good. He must be good itself. More than this, contingent beings aim for what is best, id quod est optimum, not only for them, but also for the universe as a whole, in Aquinas' understanding. He has this idea of oneness of the universe. And if this is the case, we should then acknowledge that God, who desires the goodness of the universe as a whole, taken as one, himself must be one and totally simple. Eventually, the fourth point is this. Things acting for an end, they act for an end always or nearly always in the same way, says Aquinas in his fifth way. What may stand on their way is either per se causation of some other entities or per se or per accident's quasi-causal character of chance occurrences. If this is the case, I think the conclusion is God is not only the author of both regularity and chance, but also the principle of their interplay in dynamically changing reality. So my claim is this: God, discovered by following Aquinas' fifth way as the source, as discovered as the source of all teleological phenomena in the universe, is also discovered as life itself, as being omniscient and intelligent, as goodness itself, and as author of regularity and chance. And this is something profound, because we learn all this before we will refer to revelation. And I believe this shows the interpretative potential of natural theology in classical understanding of what natural theology is. Now, let's move to the second approach, which is theology of nature. Now, I propose my own definition of theology of nature, which goes something like this. I suggest that theology of nature departs from the belief in God. So we approach the topic from the other direction. We depart from the belief in God based on historical revelation, codified in the scriptures and reflected upon within theological tradition, and religious experience, personal and communal. We depart from this point and we apply this revealed knowledge about God, this perspective, as an explanatory tool providing a definitive answer to the questions of origin and ultimate fulfillment of natural phenomena observed in the universe. Okay, now what is the advantage of this approach? The advantage of this approach is this: the explanatory potential of the revelation of God given us by God in his relation to the contingent universe enables us to develop an analogously far-reaching notion of the ultimate meaning of things that surround us. The difficulty here might be that if this approach is taken alone, it might alienate some Christians who hesitate to engage in critical analysis of the revealed truth, received tradition, and personal and communal religious experience. And that is why here we, fortunately, we may say, when analyzing nature, theology may and should turn to reason, including the research pursued by natural sciences, because the latter help the theologian to objectify, better understand, and penetrate the depth of his or her faith. Now, this is, once again, theology of nature. So what do we learn or first, let's ask the question that is the second part of the title of my lecture. Does, therefore, now God prove the existence of teleology? Because now we begin from revelation, right? And then does the existence of God prove the existence of teleology? Well, you may think it's a strange question, and I think it is in a way, because it would be rather strange to claim that the existence of God proves the existence of the natural world, which actually is better known to us than the principles of theology, which need to be revealed, right? And things that are known to us come to us through our senses. We don't need revelation for this. Well, this is true, but we may still argue that from the point of view of theology of nature, our knowledge of God and our relationship towards Him as the creator of all natural, as the creator, they enable us to discover a deeper theological meaning of natural phenomena, including those which may not be directly available for empirical research, such as teleology. Not, at least not all aspects of teleology are available for empirical research. So let's then try to see what we can learn from Aquinas' fifth way in reference to teleology, within the scheme of theology of nature, okay? I think the first important thing is this. Here we discover something really profound. Just as human mind, reflecting upon goal-directedness observed in nature, is capable of discovering God as its source, departing from nature we reach God, the same human intellect, enlightened by the revealed truth, realizes that all created contingent beings flow from God and must be directed towards God. You see? So with natural theology, we discover that all teleology came from God. With theology of nature, we discover that all teleology is directed back towards God. Therefore, Aquinas would say everything is called good from the divine goodness as from the first exemplary, effective, and final principle of all goodness. Again, all things, by desiring their own perfection, which we see in nature, they desire God Himself, inasmuch as the perfection of all things are so many similitudes of the divine being. And some may know Him as He is Himself, human beings. Others may know some participation of His goodness, animals, but still others, plants and inanimate objects, they have a natural desire without any knowledge. But they all trying to achieve what is good for them. Aquinas says they want to reach towards God, and you can learn this only in theology of nature. All things, once again, desire God as their end when they desire some good thing, whether this desire be intellectual or sensible or natural. And this is really, really profound. We may therefore conclude, we can actually, this is profound, but we can move still forward and still deeper, I believe, in our theology of nature in reference to teleology, because we may think that just as the original sin of the first parents harmed the entire created reality, the eschatological consummation of the history of salvation at the second coming of Jesus Christ will bring its final renewal and transformation. Therefore, nature's groaning for restoration, expressed by St. Paul in the letter to Romans, finds its expression in our conscious longing for the final completion of the rebirth of our nature at the end of time. And through this rebirth, the entire creation will be re-established in the dignity given to it by God at the moment of creation and disgraced by human sin. Now, if this is the case, then I suggest intrinsic teleology of each created entity is an expression of its groaning for the fulfillment in God. And therefore flowing from God, yet ontologically radically distinct from Him, created beings strive to achieve the maximal level of actuality and goodness available to them. Their intrinsic teleology is thus oriented towards the highest possible resemblance of the perfection and goodness of God. And this, I believe, enables us to analogically extend the classical theological scheme of exitus and redditus, departing from God and coming back to God, traditionally referred to humanity, to entire creation. Then we summarize, therefore, saying that the end of all things, by which Aquinas seems to understand the totality of the universe, is some extrinsic good, which is outside of the universe, and all creatures, they strive towards it. Okay, these were two ways of dealing with teleology in Aquinas' fifth way. Once again, in reference to natural theology, departing from nature, reaching God, and then theology of nature, departing from God and looking what new we learn about teleology. And as I said, we've learned that that natural teleology that we observe in the universe, theologically speaking, directs all creatures towards the Creator, to reach towards Him. Now let's move to the third part of my presentation, which is dedicated to few remarks about a place of teleology in panentheism. We have this, I like this image very much. I found it online, an image of panentheism, which says that everything is in God, panentheos, who at the same time transcends the created and contingent reality. This is a new movement in theology in a way, but only in a way, because panentheism is one of the prominent versions of theism rooted in some ancient non-Christian and Christian traditions. It is recommended nowadays, today, as forging a middle path between classical theism and pantheism. And panentheism nowadays gained much popularity, especially in the last century. And it is important for us in this conference because a number of authors in Science and Theology dialogue, they actually place themselves as followers of panentheism. We may think about Ian Barbour, Philip Clayton, Paul Davies, Arthur Peacock, and recently deceased, just a few days ago, John Polkinghorne. Now, so how do they see nature? This is a first question that I believe we need to answer here. So all of them focusing their research on the philosophical and theological implications of quantum mechanics, the theory of relativity, the Big Bang theory, non-equilibrium thermodynamics, evolutionary biology, and genetics. They all state what has been emphasized many times in this conference. They claim that what we deal with in nature is an interplay of law and chance, or of order or determinism and chance. And yes, indeed, we find followers of panentheism within this Science and Theology dialogue claiming precisely this. For example, Arthur Peacock would say that what we see in the nature is the interplay of chance and law, and it is creative. Ian Barbour says randomness at one level leads to dynamic patterns at another level. Paul Kinghorn says both chance and necessity are indispensable partners in the fruitful history of the universe. Now, referring these to God, they will emphasize that Peacock says God is the ultimate ground and source of both law, necessity, and chance. Both law and chance are part of God's design, says Barbour. And Paul Kinghorn, one should look for God's presence in the historical contingency, chance, as well as in the regularity, necessity of what is happening. So I totally agree with what they say here. At the same time, I want to ask two questions. The first question is this: what is the natural principle of necessity and order, if there is one? Well, to this, Paul Kinghorn would say these are lawful regularities of physical processes. Well, yes, but laws of nature, as claims William Steger, they are only imperfect abstract descriptions of physical phenomena and not prescriptions dictating or enforcing behavior. So maybe necessity and order observable in empirical science require another grounding, which is metaphysical. And I think that such foundation can be defined in reference to classical categories of substantial form, intrinsic teleology, goal-directedness, and normative notion of a good proper to a given entity. And these are categories to which those thinkers in a panentheistic movement, they, I think, rarely refer. Now, then, and second question, if God truly grounds and is the source of order and chance, well, we may say, how does God ground and is the source of order and chance? Well, to this question, the answer would be, if you would like to introduce those classical categories, the answer would be God as a purpose and goodness is, as pure act and goodness is the ultimate source of clearly defined metaphysical categories of substantial form, intrinsic teleology, and normative notion of a good proper to a given entity. Again, this is the language that is avoided by panentheists. And I think I have two reasons why I think deliberately a science-oriented panentheism avoids teleology. The first reason is this: I believe that they associate teleology with a particular kind of design arguments which assume direct special divine interventions in nature and are often identified as God of Gaps type of reasoning. Look at this quote from Davies, but Barbour thinks similar. Davies says this: in the earlier divine teleological schemes of pre-Darwinian Christianity, God directly selected a final outcome and simply engineered the end product by supernatural manipulation. So Davies says, I want to offer teleology without teleology. He says the creativity of nature mimics pre-Darwinian teleology, but does not require the violation or suspension of the physical laws. Now, you can clearly, in the light of what was said in this lecture, you can clearly see, and it is apparent that Davies' notion of the earlier divine teleological schemes refers to the notion of teleology that has little, if anything, to do with the one offered by Aristotle and theologically reflected by Aquinas. It most likely refers to William Paley's argument from design, which is refurbished, which in its refurbished version is fostered by the contemporary proponents of intelligent design. So I think that if panentheists realize this, they may be more in favor of teleology. The second argument, and the second reason why I think they don't necessarily like teleology is this: well, panentheism, in a way, one way or the other, assumes that all things actually already are in God. there's a whole lot of question. Another very difficult question: what they mean by that, and how we interpret this "and" in panentheos. My book that is coming in May is entirely dedicated to this question. But let's leave it aside. Panentheism assumes that things in a way are already in God, and I think this might obscure the notion of intrinsic teleology in created entities as oriented towards the highest possible resemblance of the perfection of God, and similar with the grades of goodness proper to creatures, which are directed toward God as goodness itself. I want to emphasize that I claim that this theological manifesto of panentheism, that all things are already in God, I want to say once again, this might obscure the notion of intrinsic teleology. It doesn't have to obscure that notion of intrinsic teleology. I believe you can have and you can refer to teleology in panentheism, but once again, I did not find authors writing within this theological tradition in Science Theology Dialogue referring to the teleology very much. They actually do not do that in my understanding of their theology. So here is the conclusion. I think that teleology is theologically fruitful, both within the perspective of natural theology and theology of nature. Well, there's a work to be done still. I think a further research is needed that will first reinvigorate the classical theological reflection on teleology, a research which will contextualize it in reference to contemporary science. This is part of what we try to do in this conference. And also a research that will engage it into a conversation with other schools of theology participating in the ongoing dialogue between science, philosophy, and theology, including science-oriented panentheism. There is another point of reference here, or theological tradition you might refer to, that is process theism embraced by Ian Barbour, but also in one way or the other by other thinkers listed here. I do not have time to discuss it in this lecture. It has come to its end. But as an outcome of this presentation, I have already a paper ready where I actually discuss both panentheism and process theism in Science and Theology Dialogue in reference to teleology. So I hope this paper will be published and you may be able to reach towards it. This is the end of my presentation. Here are the sources I used for quotations. Thank you very much for your attendance, and I am now ready and open for questions.
There we are. Thank you very much, Father Mariusz, for that very insightful and intriguing talk. And there are already a number of questions, so we'll jump right in here. So let's see if I could start. So the first one. Right. So the first one here I'm looking at was asked to be Reverend Inrich Gel, I believe. What would be the problem with the thesis that intrinsic theology is just a necessary feature of substances with no outside transcendent cause, as Aristotle seems to have thought? So, if intrinsic theology is just a necessary feature of substances, is that a problem, or how does that fit into what you've been talking about?
Okay, so it's a very interesting question, and I'm thinking through it right now, so I'm not 100% sure whether my answer to it is appropriate. I would tend to think that, one way, on the one hand, for Aquinas, nature works, and if it is just a natural phenomenon and we don't find an immediate direct reference to God as a source of it, fine, it works, but within his scheme it will still be within God's providence, but maybe without this direct reference that we may find or that I was trying to explain in my lecture. So I would say this, and I think that would be my answer. Okay. I mean, it's actually maybe not that complex. That is my answer.
All right. So we have a question from, I believe, Mark Mondano. Could you read your question?
Good day. Can you hear me? Could you hear me?
Yes, but you do speak up.
Okay. My question, brother Mariusz, my question is, in your opinion, do you think that Aquinas' fifth way to be the best and firm arguments of proving God's existence in all the arguments, because there are
Okay, thank you. So my answer to this would be this. First of all, I don't have a clear view on which of the ways in which Aquinas argues in favor of the existence of God would be the best one. And to begin with, I would be very careful to calling them or to naming them proofs. In reference to contemporary metaphysics, to contemporary philosophy, and also, so that's a very questionable thing. So I tend to treat them as a reasonable arguments in favor of God's existence. I'm not quite sure we can find true proofs for God's existence. And then whether this one is the best one, hard to say. I think I don't have a preference here.
Luca Settimo, could you ask your question?
Oh, hello. Hi, Mariusz. My question, it was about the, you mentioned in the presentation that chance is ontologically real, if I understood correctly. And I know that many theologians will dispute that. I would like just a clarification, because chaos can be seen as an attractor, something that drives biological phenomena, for example, but it can also be seen as absence of information, absence of physical law, so no foundation. So it's very risky to say that is ontologically real. Just a clarification.
We actually had with Father Thomas a conversation between before I think this last lecture, and we both think that both for Aristotle and Aquinas, chance is ontologically real. Now, the dispute, even between us, is whether this explanation, where there are two lines of causation and they cross, whether this is just epistemological chance or already ontological chance. But even if it is not, and even if it is only epistemological chance, Father Thomas claims that there is still ontological chance because of the principles of act and potency, and because of the pure potentiality of primary matter, and because of that, and substantial form, they never like, am I right? Like perfectly inform matter to, like, in a way that would bring it to the completion where, like, nothing can be like achieved anymore.
There's a way in which, for instance, I'm definitely, I need to look back to see what exactly is Aristotle versus Aquinas that I'd be quoting on here. But the way that for instance, the heavenly spheres are related to their matter is not the same as the way that contingent sublunary beings are related to their matter.
Yeah,
and there's a certain weakness in the very forms of contingent things, such that they do inform matter, but they never inform matter in a way that is necessary and perfect. And so there's an inherent indeterminacy to a certain aspect of even in the work, even in Aristotle. And there's some, the work I always go back to when I start thinking about this is Charles de Koninck's work on chance and indeterminacy, where he makes a very strong argument that that Aquinas believes the world is inherently indeterministic, and that later attempts to incorporate a sort of purely deterministic notion of the physical world depart from the kind of Aristotle and Aquinas, or more along the lines of Scotus or something like that.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, but this is always chance within order. Always both Aristotle and Aquinas, they would say order and natures are first, and because they are out there, you can have chance. Otherwise, you could not have chance. So radical theism or theism is not a way to go for them.
So let's see. I believe it's Father Hugh McKenzie. Could you ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the talk. Yeah, I mean, just listening to you there, I suppose one version of my question is, in your application of that traditional hylomorphism, form matter stuff to the cosmos, might you have a tendency just to make God the form of the universe, which would be pure pantheism? Given that, it's true. I think you acknowledge that the reason side, the natural theology side, reflects about our observations of the universe and realizes a teleology to higher and higher. How do you universalize that? I suppose is another way of questioning to get some sort of transcendence to God. How is it you are just not going to end up just saying, as science seems to show, purely science, that it's the whole universe that is the final teleology of all things. There's no need for it to go on and on to God. So I suppose what I'm saying is, it seems to me your argument is going to end up with pure pantheism.
Why would it end up with pure pantheism?
Because God becomes the form of the universe. What we, discern. But
well, okay. I'm sorry, because I think I understand right now, and I think my answer to this would be that in natural theology, we simply ask about the first, the source of all teleology. So why would the conclusion be that we need God as a form of the whole universe? We simply here want to achieve a goal, which is to say God is the principle of all teleological phenomena in the universe.
Yeah, how do you get to that jump? How do you jump from observation of teleology within the cosmos to the principle of that teleology?
Well, I mean, for Aquinas, I believe for Aquinas, it would be the claim that all theological phenomena need an explanation, and then if you
the principle of sufficient reason or something. Yeah, so that's a universalized. Thomas is universalizing the observations of modern science. Which obviously modern philosophy would not accept that. Based upon repeated experimental observation of unities and maybe a hierarchy of levels within the universe, you can and that's specifically within the universe, because science observes within the universe, within environments. It was a little bit
and it's a brilliant question, and I think it actually touches on the difficulty of the fifth way, which I believe makes it impossible even to call it a proof for the existence of God. Because I think what you touch on with what you referred to with this question is precisely this quidditive aspect of this demonstration, the knowledge, the quidditive knowledge of who God is. Because then on the way we would have to say that he is the one who is the principle of all teleology, but then we assume that this would be a property of God, and then we say that this proves his existence, but then we end up in proving something that we assume in a way.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
In which case your theology of nature trumps your natural theology, and you are not defending the ability to prove the
Christian. I mean, so as I said in my lecture, Father, I deliberately did not call it a proof. I said it's a meaningful way of reasoning for me in favor of the existence of God. I personally, I don't think it's a proof by the standards of contemporary. And Thomas Aquinas does not say about proof either. He speaks about ways, and there's a long conversation, as you know, and long debate what he means by saying ways.
Yeah, okay, fine. But you're denying the ability to prove God rationally, to prove his quiddity, to prove existence as the classical transcendent God.
Well, again, I think the question would be, what is the proof here? Because I can still argue that I can rationally think and
observing nature from
I can rationally observe nature, and I can come to the conclusion that is the best possible explanation, which would be that there is God who is the source of all teleology. But whether I would call it proof, and by which standards of logical reasoning, philosophical reasoning, I would call it a proof, it's another way. It's another thing. I think so. I don't think it makes it impossible at all to reason this way, but whether it is a proof or not is another issue.
Right. I think there's obviously a lot more that can be said there. But why don't we move on to another question, which is much more specific and hits much closer to home to those of us in Italy about to go into another lockdown. From Tony Coyne.
Thanks, Father. I'm probably going from the macro to the micro now. My question is, how should we view viruses within a teleological framework? How are we to understand good directedness in such an organism? Do we view this in the context of the fall and suffering? I suppose one perhaps supplemental question is, does a virus strive for perfection? Question mark.
Thank you. So I believe that it does strive for perfection. It's perfection, that's for sure. Again, classical answers to theodicy, whether we agree with them or not, is another issue. But our framework of reference is always limited, and we don't know in what ways what's happening right now is written into a providence of God, which strives for the best and for what is good for us. And also you have yes, this virus is harming us and killing us, but we cannot live without viruses at the same time as well. So they so it is always like nature harms and helps in the same time, and often the same things in nature do both. So that would be my answer to your question. So I would say, once again, I would believe that it is still within this theological scheme that I presented here, and direct where the whole reality is directed towards God teleologically, having viruses and what with those who are or that are harming us.
Okay, I think maybe time for one more question, and they asked. So I think Parisa asked me to read this. So, can you please elaborate on the difference between created things having final causes in themselves, the living things, he says, and outside of themselves, regarding their orientation to a final good towards God? And is there a way in which, is there a conflation that happens between those, either in yourself or do you see that elsewhere?
Once again, and so if there is
the difference between
intrinsic teleology,
the teleology of thing in themselves, and then outside themselves towards orienting to some final goods towards God. Mm-hmm. And so the difference between those, and is there a conflation in that in what you've spoken on, or
yes, thank you. So I think that especially with living organisms, the intrinsic teleology always centered on themselves, and they in a way experience it, all animals, and especially rational animals as ourselves, but this extrinsic teleology is like, I think we can discover it only, well, not only theologically speaking, actually even in ecology, we see how organisms, like how the whole entire ecosystem functions and how beings are interrelated and interdependent. And I think this is a form of teleology, a higher form of theology, which we can speak about, and even it is being discussed in biology, in natural science. So whether there's a difference, I think there are different levels and stages of teleological phenomena in nature, and I would say this is a higher stage and a different flavor of teleology that is basically present in universe at all stages of and levels of its complexity. But then, as I said, it is a natural phenomenon still. And then through revelation, we can relate it to God and see how the entire creation with, or in terms of both intrinsic and extrinsic teleology that is being pursued by different various living organisms, how those various types of teleology are ultimately directed towards God. But this we discover through theology. But as I said, it is possible also to speak about those two types, intrinsic and extrinsic teleology, in terms of natural reasoning and natural science.